In the summer of 1790, the United States of America was barely 14 years old, and it had a problem. The young nation had a president, George Washington, but no permanent home for him. The capital had been moving from city to city: Philadelphia, New York, even temporary locations along the Delaware River. Congress met in borrowed rooms. The president lived in rented houses. It was no way for the leader of a free nation to conduct business. Something had to change. The Residence Act of July 16, 1790, changed everything. This single piece of legislation did more than just authorize the construction of a presidential mansion. It created an entirely new city from nothing, on land that didn't technically belong to any state. A federal district, carved out of Maryland and Virginia, along the banks of the Potomac River. This would be Washington, the District of Columbia. But here's what most people don't know: George Washington himself chose the exact location. In October 1790, the president, along with 3 commissioners, rode out to survey the land. The area was mostly wilderness: tobacco fields, dense forests, muddy swamps, and a handful of small settlements. There were no grand boulevards, no marble buildings, no monuments. Just raw, untamed potential. Washington walked the land himself. He stood on the heights overlooking the Potomac, imagining what could be built there. He envisioned a federal city that would rival the great capitals of Europe: London, Paris, Rome. But this would be different. This would be the capital of a republic, not a monarchy. And at its heart would be the president's house. The question was, what should it look like? In March 1791, a design competition was announced. Any architect, professional or amateur, could submit plans for the presidential mansion. The prize was $500, a substantial sum in 1791, and the immortality of having your design become the home of every future president. Architects from across the young nation sent in their proposals. Some designs were modest, simple brick structures befitting a Republican leader. Others were grand palaces, inspired by the royal estates of Europe. There were designs with domes, designs with colonnades, designs with elaborate gardens and outbuildings. But one submission stood out from all the rest. It came from an Irish-born architect named James Hoban. He was 32 years old, a Catholic immigrant who had studied architecture in Dublin before coming to America in 1785. He had worked on buildings in Charleston, South Carolina, and Philadelphia, but this was his chance to create something truly monumental. Hoban's design was inspired by Leinster House in Dublin, the seat of the Irish Parliament. It was a neoclassical mansion, elegant but not ostentatious, grand but not royal. 3 stories of Aquia Creek sandstone, painted white. A north portico with Ionic columns. A south portico with a curved balcony. Symmetrical wings extending to the east and west. Over 100 rooms, though the original design called for far fewer. But Hoban's design had something else, something subtle but profound. Unlike the palaces of Europe, which were designed to impress from the outside with overwhelming scale, the White House was designed to be approachable. It would be the people's house, not a fortress. Any citizen could walk up to the front door. That was revolutionary. On July 16, 1792, James Hoban's design was officially selected. President Washington himself reviewed the final plans and made several modifications. He insisted on the sandstone facade, even though it was more expensive than brick. He added the distinctive semicircular south portico. He expanded the scale, making it larger than any private residence in America at the time. But there was a problem. The design was approved. The location was chosen. But there was no workforce to build it. No skilled stonemasons. No carpenters. No laborers. The area around the new federal city was sparsely populated, and those who lived there were mostly farmers, not builders. The solution would become one of the most controversial aspects of the White House's construction. To build a monument from the wilderness, you need hands. And in 1792, the hands that built the President's House tell a complex, often overlooked chapter of American history. While European immigrants and local laborers were hired for skilled carpentry and masonry, the backbone of the construction was provided by enslaved African Americans. They were hired out by their enslavers from Maryland and Virginia to quarry the stone, fire the bricks, and haul the heavy timber through the muddy, unforgiving terrain of the new federal district. Their names were rarely recorded in the official ledgers, but their labor is literally embedded in the foundation of the building. It is a profound historical truth: the house of the free was built, in part, by those who were not. The primary material chosen for the exterior was Aquia Creek sandstone, quarried in Virginia and floated down the Potomac River on barges. It was a beautiful, pale stone, but it was also highly porous. In the harsh winters of the mid-Atlantic, water would seep into the stone, freeze, and cause it to crack and crumble. This brings us to one of the most persistent myths in American history, that the building was painted white to cover up the burn marks from the War of 1812. The truth is far more practical. In 1798, 2 years before it was even finished, the commissioners ordered the sandstone to be coated in a lime-based whitewash. This wasn't for aesthetics, it was a necessary sealant to protect the porous stone from freezing and deteriorating. The name White House was already in casual use by the early 1800s, decades before any fire ever touched its walls. By the autumn of 1800, the building was finally habitable, though barely. The second President of the United States, John Adams, became the first chief executive to move in. But there was no grand celebration. The city of Washington was still a muddy, isolated frontier town. Inside, the mansion was damp, drafty, and largely unfinished. Many rooms lacked furniture, and the walls were still wet from the fresh plaster. Despite the bleak conditions, Adams recognized the weight of the moment. On November 1, 1800, he wrote a famous letter to his wife, Abigail, who was still in Massachusetts. He penned a blessing that would echo through the centuries: "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." For just 4 months, Adams lived in this quiet, echoing shell. Then, in the election of 1800, he was defeated by Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson moved in during 1801, he found the house still lacking. He immediately began adding his own touches, hiring James Hoban once again to complete the north and south porticos, and transforming the rough grounds into gardens. Jefferson also opened the doors to the public, establishing the tradition of the People's House, hosting informal receptions where citizens could simply walk in and shake the president's hand. But the peace of the early 19th century was not destined to last. The year 1812 brought a new conflict. The War of 1812, fought once again against the British Empire. For 2 years, the war raged along the Canadian border and the high seas. But in the summer of 1814, the conflict came directly to the doorstep of the young nation's capital. Following their victory at the Battle of Bladensburg, a force of roughly 4,500 British troops marched into Washington, D.C. The American militia had fled. The city was defenseless. Inside the president's house, First Lady Dolly Madison was waiting. Her husband, President James Madison, was away inspecting the retreating American troops. Dolly knew the British were coming. Refusing to flee in panic, she orchestrated a desperate, heroic rescue mission. She ordered the massive, full-length portrait of George Washington, painted by Gilbert Stuart, to be cut from its heavy frame. The frame was too large to move quickly, so the canvas was saved, rolled up, and loaded onto a cart along with crucial state documents, including a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Only when the sound of approaching British artillery echoed through the streets did Dolly Madison finally flee, taking refuge in Virginia. That evening, August 24, 1814, the British troops entered the empty mansion. They found the dining table still set with food, which the exhausted soldiers promptly ate. Then, on the orders of their commanders, they set the building on fire. The flames roared through the wooden floors, the unfinished rooms, and the newly added porticos. The heat was so intense that the sandstone walls cracked and blackened. The president's house was reduced to a smoldering, gutted shell. But as the British prepared to burn the Capitol and the Treasury buildings as well, the skies opened up. A sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled over Washington, bringing torrential rain and even a tornado. The downpour extinguished the fires, saving what remained of the city. Many at the time saw it as divine intervention, a storm sent to protect the fragile heart of the American Republic. When President Madison returned the next day, he walked through the charred ruins of his home. The building was a disaster. But the resolve of the nation was not. The question now was not whether to abandon the Capitol, but whether to rebuild. When the smoke finally cleared over Washington in late August 1814, the United States faced a profound existential question: should the Capitol remain in this vulnerable, swampy outpost on the Potomac, or should it be moved? The debate in Congress was fierce and deeply divided along regional lines. Northern politicians, particularly from New York and Pennsylvania, argued that Washington, D.C. was a strategic liability. It had been easily captured and burned. They proposed moving the seat of government back to the established, secure cities of Philadelphia or New York. Southern representatives, however, fiercely defended the Residence Act of 1790. They argued that abandoning the Capitol would be a surrender to British intimidation and a betrayal of George Washington's original vision. President James Madison, though grieving the loss of his home, threw his weight behind staying. In a bold display of national resilience, Congress voted in 1815 to remain in Washington and fully fund the reconstruction of the President's house. Once again, the government turned to the man who knew the building best, James Hoban. Hoban did not merely patch the cracks or rebuild what was lost. He used the reconstruction as an opportunity to improve and expand the mansion. The most significant architectural additions were the iconic porticos that define the White House's silhouette today. In 1824, the semicircular south portico was added, providing a grand, shaded entrance and a balcony that would later become famous for presidential addresses. 5 years later, in 1829, the north portico was completed, featuring a majestic triangular pediment supported by 4 towering Ionic columns, giving the building a dignified, temple-like facade. During this reconstruction, the sandstone walls were once again coated in their traditional lime-based whitewash to protect them from the elements. This fact permanently debunks the popular myth that the building was painted white to hide the scorch marks of the British fire. The building had been white since 1798, and it remained white as it rose from the ashes, stronger and more defined than before. It is also during this era that we must clarify another historical misconception: the name of the building itself. For decades, it was officially referred to as the President's Palace, the President's House, or the Executive Mansion. However, the nickname, the White House, was already in casual, widespread use by the early 1800s, appearing in newspapers and letters long before the War of 1812. It wasn't until 1901, under President Theodore Roosevelt, that the White House was officially stamped onto presidential stationery, cementing the colloquial name into law. As the 19th century progressed, the White House began to transform from a grand but rustic mansion into a modern residence, though not without growing pains. In the 1840s, gas lighting was installed throughout the building. While it was a marvel of the modern age, replacing dim, smoky whale oil lamps, it was also a massive fire hazard. The hissing gas jets and open flames in rooms lined with heavy drapes and wooden floors terrified many first families. Shortly after, in the 1850s, indoor plumbing was introduced. Running water and flush toilets were revolutionary, but the early plumbing systems were notoriously poorly designed. Leaking pipes frequently flooded the ceilings and walls, causing thousands of dollars in damage and creating a constant, hidden battle against water within the walls of the mansion. But the most profound transformation of the White House during this era was not architectural, it was emotional. When Abraham Lincoln moved into the Executive Mansion in 1861, the United States was tearing itself apart. The White House ceased to be just a residence, it became the nerve center of a massive military conflict. The hallways echoed with the boots of generals, the rustle of telegrams from the front lines, and the heavy, suffocating weight of a nation at war. The mansion also became a place of deep, personal tragedy for the Lincoln family. In 1862, the Lincolns' beloved 11-year-old son, Willie, contracted typhoid fever and died in a second-floor bedroom of the White House. The grief was paralyzing. Mary Todd Lincoln was inconsolable, and Abraham Lincoln was frequently seen wandering the halls at night, overwhelmed by sorrow. The White House, for a time, felt less like a seat of power and more like a house of mourning. Yet, Lincoln persevered. He guided the nation through its darkest hours from the very rooms that had been rebuilt a half-century earlier. He survived 4 years of brutal war, signing the Emancipation Proclamation and delivering the Gettysburg Address. But the peace he fought so hard to achieve would be tragically short-lived. On the evening of April 14, 1865, just days after the Confederate surrender at Appomattox, President Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, becoming the first American president to be murdered in office. When his body was returned to the White House, the East Room was draped in black. The nation that had fought so hard to preserve the Union now gathered in the very halls of the president's house to mourn the man who had saved it. The White House had survived fire, war, and political turmoil, but the shadow of that spring day in 1865 would forever alter the soul of the building. As the 19th century drew to a close, the United States was transforming into an industrial powerhouse, but the president's house was struggling to keep up. By the Gilded Age, the executive mansion was literally bursting at the seams. Presidents like Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes found the building completely inadequate for the demands of a growing nation. The family quarters were cramped, the offices were chaotic, and the hallways were a constant parade of politicians, diplomats, job seekers, and reporters. The building was groaning under the weight of modern America. It was no longer just a home, it was a crowded, noisy, overworked institution. Then came the spark of modernity, electricity. In 1891, during the administration of President Benjamin Harrison, wires were secretly threaded through the walls and ceilings of the White House. It was a marvel of the modern age, promising to banish the hissing, smoky danger of gas lighting forever. But there was a catch. The technology was so new, and the public understanding of it so poor, that the Harrison family was absolutely terrified of it. They believed the hidden wires might electrocute them. According to historical accounts, the President and First Lady refused to touch the light switches themselves. They instructed the White House staff to turn the lights on and off for them. At night, the family would often go to sleep with the electric lights blazing in their rooms, too frightened to turn them off, while the staff dutifully flipped the switches from the safety of the hallway. It is a charming, humanizing reminder that even the most powerful people in the world can be baffled by new technology. But the true revolution of the White House came at the dawn of the 20th century, brought about by its most energetic occupant, Theodore Roosevelt. When T.R. moved in during 1901 with his wife and 6 rambunctious children, the mansion descended into joyful chaos. The White House was home to a menagerie of exotic pets, including a badger, a bear, and a small elephant. More importantly, Roosevelt's expansive view of the presidency meant he needed a massive staff. The existing offices on the second floor were utterly overwhelmed. Roosevelt made a bold, unprecedented decision: he would gut the building and rebuild it to serve the modern presidency. In 1902, he hired the prestigious architectural firm of McKim, Mead and White to oversee a massive renovation. They stripped the interior down to its brick walls, modernized the plumbing, reinforced the floors, and redesigned the staterooms in a refined, neoclassical style that still defines the public spaces today. But Roosevelt's most lasting contribution was born out of necessity. To separate the chaotic, noisy work of the presidency from the private life of the first family, Roosevelt ordered the construction of a temporary office building attached to the west side of the mansion. This was the birth of the West Wing. For the first time, the president had a dedicated workspace away from the family's living quarters. While the famous Oval Office wouldn't be built until William Howard Taft's administration in 1909, the concept of a centralized, powerful executive workspace was born under Roosevelt. It was also during this renovation, in 1901, that Theodore Roosevelt made it official. He had presidential stationery printed with the name, the White House, finally cementing the nickname into formal government use. The building seemed secure, modernized, and ready for the new century. But the old, hidden dangers of the mansion were not entirely gone. On Christmas Eve, 1929, during the early days of Herbert Hoover's presidency, disaster struck again. A faulty electrical wire in the third-floor attic ignited. Because the upper floors still contained original, dry wooden beams from the 18th and 19th centuries, the fire spread with terrifying speed. Thick, black smoke billowed out of the roof, visible across the entire city of Washington. Panic erupted. The Secret Service, White House staff, and local firefighters rushed into the burning building. Their first priority was not the furniture, but the history. Just as Dolly Madison had done 115 years earlier, rescuers fought their way through the smoke to save the iconic Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington, along with priceless historical documents and the Lincoln bed. By the time the fire was brought under control, the entire third floor and the roof were gutted. The historic structure had survived, but it was severely damaged. President Hoover and his family had to temporarily relocate, and a massive, hurried reconstruction of the upper floors was required. It was a stark reminder, no matter how much steel, wire, and modern technology was poured into the White House, its ancient bones remained vulnerable. The building had survived war, political turmoil, and now, a second devastating fire. But the most radical transformation in the history of the White House was still to come, a transformation so extreme that the building would be completely hollowed out, leaving only the outer stone walls standing. By the mid-20th century, the White House was a beautiful, iconic facade hiding a deadly, crumbling secret. For over a century, presidents had added wings, floors, and heavy furniture to a building that was never designed to hold it. The original timber frames were rotting. The plaster was cracking. The plumbing was a labyrinth of leaking, outdated pipes. But it wasn't until Harry S. Truman moved into the executive mansion in 1945 that the true extent of the danger became impossible to ignore. The warning signs were subtle at first. Doors would stick. Floors would slope noticeably. But in 1948, the building issued a terrifying, undeniable warning. One afternoon, Margaret Truman, the president's daughter, was practicing the piano in her second-floor bedroom. Suddenly, there was a loud, sickening crack. The floor beneath the heavy grand piano gave way. The piano leg crashed straight through the ceiling of the room below, narrowly missing a Secret Service agent. Around the same time, the first family's bathtub began to sink into the floor. A heavy crystal chandelier in the East Room was observed swaying dangerously when people walked across the floor above it. President Truman ordered an immediate, top-secret structural inspection. The engineer's report was grim. The White House was not just old, it was actively collapsing. The load-bearing walls were bowing outward. The wooden joists were rotting from decades of leaks. The chief engineer bluntly told the president that the building was a fire trap and a structural hazard that could collapse at any moment. Truman was given a stark choice: abandon the White House permanently, or gut it to the studs and rebuild it from the inside out. Truman, a man who respected history but prioritized practicality, chose the latter. In December 1948, the Trumans moved across the street to Blair House, and the most radical transformation in the history of the White House began. It was known simply as the Truman Reconstruction, but the workers called it the gut job. For the next 3 years, the White House was essentially an empty shell. Everything inside was carefully catalogued and removed: the historic furniture, the chandeliers, the doors, the floors, and even the plaster. By early 1949, bulldozers were brought in. The entire interior of the building, from the ground floor up to the roof, was demolished. All that remained standing were the original, historic sandstone exterior walls. Inside this hollow stone shell, construction crews erected a massive, modern steel skeleton. It was like building a brand new skyscraper inside a historic monument. This new steel frame would support the weight of the building forever, eliminating the risk of collapse. While the shell was being reinforced, the interior was completely reimagined. The cramped, maze-like layout of the 19th century was swept away. The number of rooms was expanded from around 100 to 132. State-of-the-art plumbing, modern electrical grids, central air conditioning, and advanced fire suppression systems were installed. 2 new underground levels were excavated to provide secure storage, a modern kitchen, and, crucially, a bomb shelter. This subterranean addition was the birth of the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, POC. Built deep beneath the East Wing, this reinforced concrete bunker was designed to protect the president and their staff in the event of a nuclear attack, a very real fear as the Cold War escalated. Above ground, Truman also made one highly visible, and highly controversial, addition. He had always admired the view of the Washington Monument from the second floor, but there was no safe way to step outside. So, he ordered the construction of a 2-tiered balcony on the south facade, directly above the iconic portico. When the plans were leaked, architectural purists were outraged. They called it a pimple on the perfect symmetry of James Hoban's original design. But Truman stood his ground, famously stating that he wanted a place to get some fresh air. The balcony was built, and despite the initial backlash, it remains a permanent, beloved feature of the White House today. In March 1952, the Reconstruction was complete. The Trumans moved back in. To the public eye, the White House looked exactly as it had in the 19th century. But beneath the historic paint and the familiar columns, it was a thoroughly modern, structurally invincible fortress. Truman had saved the White House. But as the 1960s approached, a new kind of preservation was needed. The building was structurally sound, but it had lost its historical soul. The rooms were filled with cheap, mass-produced reproduction furniture. The grand halls felt more like a mid-century hotel than the home of the leaders of the free world. It would take a young, charismatic president and his stylish, history-obsessed First Lady to bring the spirit of the past back into the modern steel and stone shell. When John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jacqueline, moved into the White House in January 1961, they stepped into a building that was structurally sound, but historically hollow. Thanks to Harry Truman's massive reconstruction, the floors no longer sagged, and the walls no longer threatened to collapse. But as Jacqueline Kennedy walked through the state rooms, she was deeply unsettled. The mansion felt less like the historic heart of a republic and more like a mid-century hotel. The rooms were filled with cheap, mass-produced reproduction furniture. The carpets were faded. The walls lacked the depth and character of the nation's story. Jacqueline Kennedy was a woman with a profound respect for history, and she believed the White House should be a living museum, a reflection of American art and culture, not just a temporary residence for the first family. She didn't just hire an interior decorator, she assembled a team of historians, curators, and antiques experts. Together, they formed the White House Historical Association and the Committee for the Preservation of the White House. Their mandate was revolutionary: to scour the country for authentic 18th and 19th century American furniture, art, and artifacts, and to return them to the rooms where they belonged. It became a national treasure hunt. Antiques were discovered in dusty attics, purchased from private collectors, and donated by patriotic citizens. Historic pieces that had been scattered or sold off by previous administrations were tracked down and brought home. The Blue Room, the Red Room, and the Green Room were transformed from generic parlors into meticulously researched historical exhibits. But Jacqueline Kennedy knew that restoring the house was only half the battle; she had to share it with the American people. In February 1962, she took a massive, unprecedented gamble. She invited CBS News into the White House for a live, primetime television broadcast. At the time, live television tours of the president's home were considered a breach of privacy and protocol. But Jackie insisted. Dressed in a chic pink suit, she guided reporter Charles Collingwood through the newly restored rooms. Her voice was soft, knowledgeable, and deeply passionate. She didn't just point out furniture, she told the stories of the people who had lived there. She spoke of John Adams' loneliness, Abraham Lincoln's grief, and Theodore Roosevelt's energy. The gamble paid off spectacularly. An estimated 80 million Americans tuned in to watch the broadcast. It was a cultural phenomenon. The tour didn't just boost Jacqueline Kennedy's popularity, it sparked a nationwide interest in historic preservation. It changed the way Americans viewed their own history, transforming the White House from a distant political symbol into a shared, cherished national heritage. For a brief, shining moment in the early 1960s, the White House felt more open, more cultured, and more connected to the public than ever before. But history is not just about the past, it is about how the past prepares us for the future. And the future would test the very foundations of this house in ways no one in 1962 could have imagined. The illusion of the completely open People's House was destined to fade. As the decades passed, the threats against the presidency grew more complex, more violent, and more technologically advanced. The White House had to evolve from a historic home into a modern fortress. This evolution reached its most terrifying climax on the morning of September 11, 2001. When the first plane struck the World Trade Center, the White House was initially on high alert, but not yet in crisis. But as the second plane hit, and then the horrifying news broke that a third plane was heading directly toward Washington, D.C., the abstract threat became a visceral, immediate reality. At 9:45 a.m., the order was given. The Presidential Emergency Operations Center, POC, the deep, reinforced concrete bunker secretly excavated beneath the East Wing during Harry Truman's Reconstruction, was activated. Vice President Dick Cheney, senior staff, and Secret Service agents were rushed through hidden corridors and descended into the subterranean command center. For hours, while the president was airborne on Marine One, the POC served as the nerve center of the United States government. The thick concrete walls, designed during the Cold War to withstand a nuclear blast, now shielded the nation's leaders from the chaos unfolding above ground. When it was all over, the White House stood physically unharmed. But the psychological landscape had changed forever. The era of casual public access was over. The perimeter was hardened. The airspace above became a strictly enforced no-fly zone. The White House had survived the British, the Civil War, structural collapse, and now, the darkest day of the modern era. It remained standing, a silent, stoic witness to the endurance of the nation it houses. If the White House is the body of the American presidency, the Oval Office is its beating heart. But here is a historical fact that surprises many: the Oval Office did not exist for the first 117 years of the White House's history. For over a century, presidents worked in cramped, chaotic rooms on the second floor, right above their families' living quarters. It wasn't until 1909, under President William Howard Taft, that the first Oval Office was created in the newly built West Wing. Taft, a large man who needed space, wanted a room that reflected the shape of the executive seal. But it was Franklin D. Roosevelt who gave the room its modern identity. In 1934, FDR moved the Oval Office to its current location in the southeast corner of the West Wing. He did this for two very practical reasons: he wanted more natural light, and he needed a room that was easily accessible for his wheelchair. Since that day, every president has personalized this space, but one object has remained a constant, anchoring presence in the room for over a century: the Resolute Desk. The story of this desk is one of the most remarkable tales of international diplomacy and maritime survival in history. In 1852, the British Royal Navy commissioned a ship named HMS Resolute to search for the lost Arctic expedition of Sir John Franklin. The ship was built from English oak, designed to withstand the crushing ice of the frozen north. But in 1854, the Resolute became hopelessly trapped in the pack ice of the Canadian Arctic. The crew was forced to abandon ship, and it was left to drift, a ghost ship in the frozen wasteland. A year later, an American whaling ship, the George Henry, spotted the Resolute drifting aimlessly near Baffin Island. The American crew boarded the abandoned British vessel, salvaged it, and sailed it back to Connecticut. The U.S. government purchased the ship, refitted it, and in a stunning gesture of goodwill, sailed it back to England and gifted it to Queen Victoria in 1856. The Queen was deeply moved. When the Resolute was finally decommissioned and broken up in 1879, she ordered that the finest timbers from the ship's hull be used to craft a magnificent writing desk. In 1880, she presented this desk to President Rutherford B. Hayes as a token of Anglo-American friendship. Since then, the Resolute Desk has sat in the Oval Office for the majority of modern presidencies. It has borne the weight of history. John F. Kennedy signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty at this desk. Lyndon B. Johnson made the fateful decisions to escalate the Vietnam War here. And in 1963, a young John F. Kennedy Jr. famously played beneath this very desk, captured in one of the most iconic photographs in American history. It is a desk born from a lost ship, saved by enemies, and transformed into the ultimate symbol of American power. But the power of the White House is not just contained within its visible walls. Beneath the manicured lawns lies a hidden, subterranean world. The White House grounds are crisscrossed by a network of secret tunnels and underground passages, built over decades for security, convenience, and survival. The most famous of these is the tunnel connecting the White House to the Treasury Building, constructed in the 1930s and expanded during World War II. It allowed President Franklin D. Roosevelt to move securely between his office and the Treasury without being seen by the public or the press. Another vital tunnel connects the White House to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, EEOB, allowing staff and the President to traverse the complex underground, safe from the elements and potential threats. There are other hidden spaces, too. Beneath the West Wing colonnade lies a secret swimming pool, originally built in 1933 for FDR's polio therapy. In 1969, President Richard Nixon, needing a place to hold daily press briefings, had the pool covered with a floor and transformed it into the White House press briefing room. If you look closely at the walls of the briefing room today, you can still see the original blue tiles of the presidential pool peeking out from behind the podium. Yet, even with all its underground security and historical weight, the White House can become a pressure cooker. The constant scrutiny, the noise, the sheer density of power can be suffocating. For this reason, every modern president has relied on a secret escape, Camp David. Nestled in the dense, quiet woods of the Catoctin Mountain Park in Maryland, this presidential retreat was originally built in the 1930s as a camp for federal government employees. Franklin D. Roosevelt discovered it in 1942 and immediately claimed it as a presidential retreat, naming it Shangri-La after the mythical utopia. It was here, away from the prying eyes of Washington, that FDR planned the D-Day invasion with Winston Churchill. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower renamed the camp in honor of his father and his grandson, both named David. Camp David became more than just a retreat, it became a stage for some of the most critical diplomatic breakthroughs in modern history. Most notably, in September 1978, President Jimmy Carter brought Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to Camp David. For 13 grueling days, the three men negotiated in total isolation, away from the media and political pressures. The resulting Camp David Accords led to the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation, a monumental achievement that earned Carter the Nobel Peace Prize. From the timbers of a lost Arctic ship to the secret tunnels beneath the lawn, and the quiet woods of Camp David, the machinery of the presidency operates in layers. Some of it is on full display for the world to see. But much of it remains hidden, waiting in the shadows of history. While the West Wing is universally recognized as the epicenter of executive power, the true heart of the White House's domestic and cultural life beats in a different direction, the East Wing. For the first century of the White House's existence, there was no East Wing at all. The area was simply an open space. It wasn't until 1942, during the height of World War II, that President Franklin D. Roosevelt ordered the construction of a new structure on the east side. Ostensibly, it was built to provide additional office space for the growing military staff. But there was a secret, practical motive. It was designed to completely hide the new presidential swimming pool that FDR had built for his polio therapy, shielding it from the view of the public and the press. Over time, this utilitarian addition evolved into something profound. By the 1970s, it officially became the workspace of the First Lady. While the West Wing was historically dominated by male advisors, generals, and chiefs of staff, the East Wing became the headquarters of the First Lady's initiatives, her press office, and the White House social secretary. It is the engine of the presidency's soft power, managing state dinners, championing national causes, and serving as the primary liaison between the First Family and the American public. Just outside the doors of the East Wing lies one of the most famous and photographed patches of land on Earth, the Rose Garden. Today, it is the ultimate political stage, where presidents sign landmark legislation, welcome foreign leaders, and address the nation. But for much of the White House's history, this space was a utilitarian eyesore. In the 19th century, it was used as a stable, a coal shed, and even a dumping ground for construction debris. The transformation began in 1913 when First Lady Ellen Wilson, who had a passion for gardening, cleared the debris and planted a simple rose garden. But the iconic landscape we know today was born in 1962, courtesy of Jacqueline Kennedy and her close friend, the legendary horticulturist Rachel "Bunny" Mellon. Jackie wanted a space that was elegant, historically grounded, and perfectly proportioned. Mellon designed a garden that framed the south portico like a living painting. She planted French heirloom roses, delicate crabapple trees that bloom in the spring, and a central, manicured lawn specifically designed to look beautiful on television cameras. Mellon's design was so masterful that, with only minor botanical updates, it remains virtually unchanged today. It is a rare piece of the White House that has successfully resisted the urge of every subsequent administration to redecorate. But while the Rose Garden represents the public, polished face of the presidency, the true weight of global responsibility is felt deep underground, in a windowless, highly classified bunker, the Situation Room. The Situation Room was born out of a catastrophic failure. In April 1961, the CIA-sponsored Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba ended in a humiliating disaster for the Kennedy administration. During the crisis, President Kennedy discovered a terrifying flaw in the White House's communication system. Intelligence was fragmented, messages were delayed, and the president was receiving sanitized, second-hand reports rather than raw, real-time data. Determined that this would never happen again, JFK ordered the creation of a centralized, secure communications hub. Built in the basement of the West Wing, the Situation Room was completed in 1961. It is not a single room, but a complex of secure conference rooms and communication centers. It has no windows, no natural light, and is heavily shielded against electronic eavesdropping. This is where the president goes when the world is on fire. It is where Lyndon B. Johnson monitored the Vietnam War, where George W. Bush watched the events of 9/11 unfold on live television, and where Barack Obama and his national security team sat in tense silence in 2011, watching the real-time drone feed of the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. The Situation Room is the stark, unglamorous reality of modern power, hidden just a few floors beneath the manicured lawns and historic portraits. Yet, for all its steel, concrete, and high-tech security, the White House remains a very old building. And old buildings, especially those soaked in the intense emotions of history, tend to accumulate stories that defy logical explanation. The White House is widely considered one of the most haunted locations in America. The most famous spectral resident is, unsurprisingly, Abraham Lincoln. His ghost has reportedly been seen by numerous credible witnesses over the decades. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill claimed that after a late-night bath, he stepped out of the bathroom to find the ghost of Lincoln standing by the fireplace in the Yellow Oval Room. Churchill reportedly said, "Good evening, Mr. President," to which the apparition supposedly bowed and vanished. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands also reported seeing Lincoln's ghost during her stay in 1942, as did Maureen Reagan in the 1980s. But Lincoln is not alone. Abigail Adams, the fierce and pragmatic wife of John Adams, is said to haunt the East Room. When she first moved into the unfinished, damp mansion in 1800, she famously used the cavernous East Room to hang the family's laundry to dry. Staff and guests have occasionally reported the faint, ghostly sound of rustling fabric and the smell of damp soap in that very room late at night. Then there is the phantom of Andrew Jackson. Known for his fiery temper and heavy drinking, Jackson's spirit is said to linger on the ground floor. In the 1930s, a maid reportedly screamed and fled after encountering a tall, spectral figure in a military uniform pacing the halls. More commonly, visitors and staff report the sudden, overwhelming scent of Jackson's favorite pipe tobacco, or the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots echoing down empty corridors. Whether these are genuine paranormal phenomena or simply the psychological weight of history manifesting in the minds of those who walk these halls, they add a layer of profound mystery to the building. The White House is a paradox. It is a highly secure, modern fortress of global strategy, and yet, it remains a deeply human, historic home, echoing with the laughter of children, the tears of grieving parents, and the quiet, lingering whispers of the past. While the Situation Room and the Oval Office command the headlines, the true logistical miracle of the White House happens out of sight, deep in the basement, the White House kitchen. In the early 19th century, cooking was a grueling, dangerous affair. Meals were prepared over open hearths in the ground floor, filling the mansion with smoke and heat. Today, the White House kitchen is a culinary command center. It is a sprawling, stainless steel operation that must seamlessly pivot between two entirely different worlds. On a Tuesday morning, it might be preparing a simple, healthy breakfast for the first family. By Tuesday evening, it must execute a flawless, 5-course state dinner for 150 foreign dignitaries, complete with intricate dietary restrictions and flawless timing. The kitchen employs a team of 5 full-time chefs, led by the executive chef, who must also manage a massive staff of ushers, dishwashers, and stewards. Remarkably, the kitchen is connected to the state dining room by a dedicated, high-speed food elevator, ensuring that a soufflé never falls and a hot meal never cools during its journey from the basement to the first floor. But a president cannot govern entirely from within the walls of the mansion. Eventually, they must leave. And the way they travel has evolved from a simple carriage to a rolling fortress. George Washington traveled in a heavy, horse-drawn coach that took days to navigate the muddy roads of the young republic. It wasn't until 1902 that Theodore Roosevelt became the first president to ride in an automobile, a white, steam-powered Stanley steamer. The public was fascinated, but the Secret Service was terrified. By the 1930s, Franklin D. Roosevelt commissioned the Sunshine Special, a custom-built Lincoln convertible with a retractable glass roof, allowing the public to see him while protecting him from the elements. But the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 in an open-top Lincoln Continental changed presidential transportation forever. The era of the accessible, open-air president ended overnight. Today, the president travels in the Beast, officially known as Cadillac One. It looks like a stretched luxury sedan, but it is actually a 9-ton armored tank built on a heavy-duty truck chassis. Its doors are as thick as those on a Boeing 757, and the windows are multi-layered, bulletproof glass up to 5 inches thick. The cabin is completely sealed against chemical and biological attacks, with its own independent oxygen supply. The trunk even carries a reserve of the president's specific blood type for emergency transfusions. It is a marvel of modern engineering, designed to ensure that the leader of the free world can survive almost any threat on the road. Yet, for all its modern armor, the White House remains a museum. The White House curator manages a collection of over 90,000 objects, from priceless paintings to historic furniture. Every administration must navigate the delicate balance of personalizing the residence while preserving its historical integrity. This collection also includes the bizarre, the wonderful, and the utterly impractical gifts presented to the president by foreign leaders and American citizens. In 1837, Wisconsin dairy farmer presented President Andrew Jackson with a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese, which was left to rot in the East Room for months, famously smelling up the entire mansion. In 1926, the Republic of Liberia gifted President Calvin Coolidge 2 baby hippopotamuses, though they were ultimately sent to the National Zoo. And in 1928, a group of Florida schoolchildren sent President Herbert Hoover a live, 7-foot alligator. Hoover, amused but practical, promptly donated the reptile to the Smithsonian. These strange artifacts serve as a reminder that the White House is not just a seat of power, but a reflection of the eccentric, generous, and unpredictable American public. As we look to the future, the White House faces a new kind of challenge. How does a 200-year-old building adapt to the 21st century? The answer lies in a careful blend of historic preservation and cutting-edge technology. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter installed solar panels on the roof of the West Wing to promote renewable energy. They were removed by the Reagan administration in 1986 during roof repairs, but were triumphantly reinstalled by President Barack Obama in 2013, where they remain today, silently generating power for the mansion. Furthermore, the digital age has required invisible fortifications. The White House is now wrapped in a digital Faraday cage, shielding its internal communications from cyber espionage. The historic walls now hide miles of fiber optic cables, ensuring that the building is as secure in cyberspace as it is in the physical world. The White House has survived fire, war, collapse, and the relentless march of time. It is a building that has constantly reinvented itself, shedding old skins while preserving its historic soul. It is, and always will be, the people's house. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we must look beyond the architecture and the politics. We must look at how the White House lives in the imagination of the world, and the hidden, everyday realities that make it a true home. In the realm of pop culture and cinema, the White House has become the ultimate symbol of American resilience, and the ultimate target. From the alien explosions of Independence Day to the gritty sieges of Olympus Has Fallen and White House Down, Hollywood has repeatedly tested the mansion's defenses on the silver screen. These films tap into a deep-seated cultural anxiety, the idea that if this house falls, the nation falls. Yet, ironically, these fictional attacks have only cemented the White House's status in the global consciousness as an indestructible icon. It is the most recognizable building on Earth, a shorthand for American power, democracy, and history. But behind the cinematic spectacle lies a reality filled with charming myths and surprising truths. Take, for example, the famous Lincoln bedroom. Popular belief holds that Abraham Lincoln slept in the ornate, rosewood bed that sits in that room today. The reality is quite different. During the Civil War, Lincoln used that room as his primary office and cabinet meeting room. The massive bed currently in the room was not added until the 1890s, during the administration of Chester A. Arthur, decades after Lincoln's death. Lincoln's actual bedroom was on the third floor, a much more modest space where he would often retreat to read telegrams from the front lines late into the night. Then there is the legendary White House bowling alley. Many imagine a grand, pristine recreational facility. The truth is far more humble. Located in the basement, it is a single-lane alley. It was originally installed in 1947 for Harry Truman, who found bowling to be a great physical therapy for his health. Richard Nixon later upgraded it in 1969, adding an automated scoring system and a rack of vintage bowling shoes. Today, it remains a quirky, slightly cramped, but beloved piece of presidential history, occasionally used by first families for a quiet, private game away from the cameras. Beneath the grandeur of the staterooms, the White House functions like a small, self-contained city, complete with its own highly specialized, lesser-known facilities. Tucked away in the basement is the White House Hair Salon. Established during the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration, this fully functional salon has served not only first ladies and presidents but also the hundreds of military and civilian staff who work in the complex. It is a rare space where the barriers of rank momentarily dissolve, and a sense of normal, everyday community thrives. Similarly, the White House Medical Unit operates a fully equipped doctor's office and examination room within the residence. Staffed by military physicians, this clinic is capable of handling everything from routine checkups to minor emergency surgeries, ensuring the president never has to leave the grounds for basic medical care. And then there are the specialized culinary spaces. Beyond the main kitchen, there are smaller, specialized prep areas designed to handle the unique, and sometimes highly specific, dietary needs of the first family. Whether it is a president's strict low-sodium regimen or a first lady's vegan preferences, the culinary staff adapts with military precision, ensuring that the most powerful person in the world is fed exactly as they need to be. As we step back and look at the White House as a whole, its true miracle becomes clear. It began in 1790 as a muddy, swampy vision on the banks of the Potomac. It was built by the hands of enslaved laborers and skilled immigrants. It was burned by the British in 1814, only to rise from the ashes stronger. It was stretched, modernized, and nearly collapsed under its own weight, only to be saved by a steel skeleton. It has been a home to grieving parents, wartime commanders, visionary reformers, and everyday families who temporarily inherited its immense legacy. The White House is not a static monument. It is a living, breathing entity. It is the only royal residence in the world that belongs to the people. Its doors have been opened to schoolchildren on field trips, to civil rights leaders demanding change, to foreign dignitaries seeking peace, and to citizens who simply wanted to shake the hand of their leader. Every scratch on the floorboards, every layer of paint on the sandstone, and every secret hidden in its walls tells a story. It is a testament to the idea that a nation, like a house, must constantly repair its foundations, adapt to the storms of history, and always leave the lights on for the future. This has been the story of the White House.